Now, we have with us this evening two psychologists, so you better be on your best behaviour, everybody else. Oliver Brecht and Andrew Wong, both from Veretis Legal Psychology. Both Andrew and Oliver prepare court reports and capacity assessments, and I know this from experience. Thank you very much for your help, Andrew. But tonight they're going to speak to us about different personality types, particularly difficult ones, and how to navigate around them in our practice. So I'll hand over to Oliver and Andrew. If everyone could please keep their microphones on mute unless they're speaking, that'll be fantastic. And without further ado, over to you both.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name's Andrew. I'm a psychologist, and with me is Oliver Brecht, who's also a psychologist and managing director of Veretis Legal Psychology. What we're going to be talking about today is basically giving you a quick definition of what personality is, when it becomes a disorder, and we'll go through a range of different personality types in terms of the DSM criteria, and finally how to deal with them, especially as their lawyer. And at the end we'll talk a bit about other difficult situations, like someone who's psychotic or aggressive towards you, or any other difficult situations that you might come across in your legal practice. So next slide. So what is personality? It's actually quite difficult to define. We could spend a whole day talking about the definition of personality, and there are multiple schools of thoughts, but for the purposes of today, for simplicity and practicality, personality is the way of thinking, feeling, and behaving that makes one person different from another. And it's usually constant over time. So it's something that doesn't change depending on the situation that you're in. And it pretty much starts from basically your teenage years all the way to adulthood. Okay, so next slide. So let's do a quick personality assessment. I think that the link was distributed to all the attendees. If you haven't done it, you can do it while you listen to this talk. It takes about 5 minutes to complete. It basically looks at the 5 main personality kind of markers. So in terms of openness, to experience, or closeness, to experience how conscientious you are, like how kind of hardworking or ambitious you are, as opposed to someone who's a bit more spontaneous, how extroverted versus introverted, how agreeable you are to other people, in relation to maintaining a relationship with them, or how opinionated you can be, for example, being antagonistic, like, you would disagree with them the moment you don't really agree with whatever they say, or how emotional you are, as opposed to being emotionally constricted to the point where you're not really feeling much. Why I'm going to get you to do this is basically to get you to understand how personality is not really, it's not that trait based, it's more of a dimension. So some, people, you hear a lot from people saying, I'm an extroverted introvert or an introverted extrovert. What that really means is you're normal, because everyone's got a bit of both. It's quite rare for people to be very extroverted, and it's quite rare for people to be very, very introverted. And the reason that I get you to do this is to get some insight into your own personality styles, because knowing how you react to other things, people, and relationships, and to your environment is very important in understanding how you interact with people. And this will be very helpful in managing difficult situations, especially when the other person is quite dysregulated. So let's move on to the next slide. When does personality become a disorder, right? It's actually quite from someone who is adaptive all the way to being disordered. There's a huge range, and I'll demonstrate that with an obsessive compulsive personality in a second. But there's a huge range of stages where it's adaptive, not very adaptive, disordered, absolutely disordered. So there's a range that I want you guys to be aware of. So the definition of a personality disorder is where it deviates from expectations of the culture and causes distress or problems functioning. So I'll give you an example for something, for what I mean by deviating from expectations of a culture. So take, for example, a person of East Asian culture who heavily relies on their immediate family for when deciding, whether to marry her husband or not. That person in that context is seen as an upstanding and honorable member of, in their eyes, of her culture. Whereas if you take a true blue Aussie female who heavily relies on her immediate family to decide who she should marry, is kind of seen as a personality disorder, namely dependent personality disorder. So it's quite contextual. And depending on, for example, if it's a culture that heavily believes on superstition, some sort of kind of shamanism kind of stuff, you wouldn't diagnose someone with schizophrenia because that's something that's consistent with their culture. So that's what I mean by deviating from expectations of the culture, and secondly, causing distress or problems in functioning. It's causing yourself or other people distress or problems in functioning or other people's functioning. So if this person, for example, someone who's quite narcissistic, will not see any problems in their lives, but everyone else around them seem to be having a real bad time. So that's kind of the two main criteria for a personality disorder. Okay, next slide. So this is something to kind of illustrate the difference between normal personality and an abnormal personality. So normal personality is someone has everyday personality traits, adaptive, coping under stress, has protective mechanisms. They can be they're resilient, they're flexible, adaptable, can be changed, can have multiple views of yourself or others, depending on the social context, is predictable and consistent in their reactions. Whereas in abnormal personalities, it's a disorder where it's maladaptive, especially under stress. It's inflexible within and across relationships. It's what we call predictably unpredictable, because that they're going to be, they tend to be quite intense. They have repeated patterns that are self-perpetuating. So I'll give you an example. For example, someone who is scared of being abandoned might basically reject someone before the relationship gets too close, and thereby think that, yeah, people will leave me, and I always break up with them before it gets too serious because I know they're going to leave me. And that's self-perpetuating. That's what we call a self-perpetuating prophecy. It's unpredictable and inconsistent in reactions. So that's the difference between normal and abnormal personality. Okay, so have a look at this slide, everyone. So this is an obsessive compulsive personality, ranging from, and there are four main personality traits. So perfectionistic, hardworking, planful, and being emotionally constricted, ranging from adaptive all the way to severe. So have a look at it. And I want you to have a think about, do you know anyone in the subclinical or actually, first of all, adaptive column, where, someone that takes pride in what they do, they believe in having a work ethic, they like to consider their choices before they act, and they rarely get excited about anything. That's at this stage, it's quite adaptive, where they're, it's kind of their strength at this point. Do you know anyone that's in the subclinical column? For example, when they feel like they have to work on things until they get them right, rarely take time off or leisure or family, for leisure or family, I have to analyze all the alternatives before I make up my mind. I don't believe in expressing much emotions. We tend to see people in that, tend to see a lot of people in the legal profession and in a lot of the professional services who have that sort of beliefs. Do you know anyone who's in the disordered or even the severely disordered column? And where do you sit in these four domains? You don't have to answer me at this moment, just have a look. And but yeah, so it's a very dimensional view of, that we take for personality. So in terms of working with someone, you know, we're not necessarily teaching you how to diagnose someone with an obsessive compulsive personality disorder, but to understand that there are various traits that some people will have. You know, some people will be quite good at being perfectionistic, you know, that they take pride in what they do, but they could work so hard that they burn themselves out, and that's in the severe range. Or they could, you know, take so long trying to anticipate the possibilities that they can't even get anything to start. And they might not feel much in as well. So it's quite, it's in terms of the awareness that we're trying to teach you, it's the personality traits and the behaviors that they exhibit, and learning how to manage them as they go. And we'll go into further detail in a second. So let's go to the next slide. So there are, just for your information, there are three main clusters for personality disorders according to the DSM. And the first one is cluster A, which is for odd and eccentric clusters. So you generally will not come across these people compared to the other clusters, especially cluster B for the dramatic, emotional, and erratic ones, especially for criminal and family lawyers. So for cluster A, oh, sorry, let's go back up to cluster A. So schizopersonality disorder is basically someone that lacks emotions in anything they do. They don't enjoy much. They prefer being alone. There's very few things that they care about and don't really find meaning in many things that they do. Someone that's paranoid will struggle to trust anybody. They always believe that people are doing things behind their backs, and they believe that, you know, people are always out there to get them. They're preoccupied with doubts about the loyalty and trustworthiness of others. So that's kind of what paranoid personality is like. Schizotypal is like someone that has odd beliefs or magical thinking that influences their behavior, which is inconsistent with the subcultural norm. So like, you know, someone that believes that, you know, because I saw, you know, as I was driving down the highway, I saw 432 antennas. And because of that, I think that it's going to be a good day, you know, that sort of stuff. And they have unusual perceptual experiences, odd thinking, and speech that is vague, circumstantial, metaphorical, over elaborate. And it's kind of what we call schizophrenia light. So they're not quite there yet, but they're quite odd at that point. Okay. This is the cluster. This is the cluster that you'll most likely run into, especially for criminal and family law practitioners. And we'll start with antisocial personality disorder. So those are the people who, you know, they cultivate a tough and aggressive personality. They kind of like your stereotypical male, but a bit worse. So they have a propensity for violence towards humans and animals. They lack respect for property. They like being difficult to get along with, callous, self-sufficient, little to no empathy, and they engage in, they're quite, you know, they can lie, they cheat, steal, they can deal drugs and other crimes. They tend to have inconsistent employment, very low threshold for boredom. So these guys, and they typically male as well. So these individuals are your typical jail guys. So when you meet them, like for example, if you practice criminal law, you meet them and you'll know it's probably not their first rodeo. Like they've been in trouble with the law for a very long time, since they were a teenager. If you look at the criminal history, they've got minor offenses all the way up to kind of violent offenses and whatever, break and enters, assault, domestic violence, whatever.
Consistent offending as well. Andrew,
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, consistent offending. And they tend to be a criminal lawyer's repeat customer. If you see that sort of history and that sort of like antisocial attitude, and kind of disregard for societal norms, I would have my my alarm bells and my red flags for them, because that speaks to recidivism, basically. And in terms of how you would manage them, I guess I would always refer them to a psychologist to get assessed and to have the risk of reoffending assessed. And I guess
we've also seen this being playing out in sexual offences as well, haven't we, Andrew? Where the behaviour has ended up being more linked to opportunistic or opportunism. Yep. And being in a position of power as opposed to an element of sexual attraction, etc. as well. So it can play out in many different ways. And as Andrew said, repeating offending from a young age, and violent offending in particular as well, where there just seems to be no regard or respect for others as well.
So the differential diagnosis between someone with an antisocial personality disorder and pedophilia basically is opportunistic kind of behavior. Pedophilia will tend to have a less, they tend not to have a criminal record as such, as they won't have as beautiful a criminal record as someone with an ASPD. So that's kind of how we would look at it. I guess for your interest, there is a difference between someone with ASPD and psychopathy, like someone who's a psychopath. So psychopathy is seen by the DSM-5 as a subcategory of ASPD, and that's where they meet the criteria for ASPD, and they are also very callous, manipulative, calculating, pathological liars, and they tend to they also narcissistic and impervious to shame. So no matter how much punishment you give them, they won't actually stop. And they tend to cloak themselves as normal. So they can be quite charming. And so that's something that you need to be aware of as well. So, although they are rarer, they tend to be overrepresented in prison. So I think it was like 5% or something last time I checked. So still pretty high, but like 0.1% in the general population. You tend to see people with psychopathic traits in higher corporate kind of area because they're quite callous. They can be quite calculative, manipulative, that sort of stuff can be seen in those people in that area as well. Oh, and also surgeons, believe it or not, which is very strange. But I guess you'd have to be a particular person to cut someone open and be okay with it. Not for me. So I'm not a psychopath, guys. Anyway, so yeah. If you find yourself becoming
a question.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm just thinking for family law, we always deal with lots of men who are violent, being accused of violence, and they kind of fit in that antisocial personality disorder category, but they just do like an anger management course, which is like, a couple of months and then suddenly they're cured. So with these disorders, is it just a matter of therapy, or is this like a genetic thing that they would have for the rest of their lives and it's just ongoing treatment?
Personality is really, personality is at the core of who we are, right? Your personality is what helps you read the world and respond to the world. So treating it is complex and it's long-term as well, particularly if you're older as well, right? So if you've been interacting with the world, making decisions on different stimulus in a certain way, for 35, 45, 55 years, 2 months is a very short time comparative to how you've been building up data to tell you to respond in another way. So generally, and sorry I jumped in here, Andrew, but generally you treat it through something called dialectical behaviour therapy as well, particularly what the bottom one there, borderline personality disorder, which is quite intense. It's you're looking at, like, Andrew, I think most DBT protocols are sort of like 2 to 3 sessions a week for around 6 to 12 months if you're taking it seriously. And it's really, it's psychoeducational based. So preemptively giving people certain situations, how would you respond to this? How should you respond to this sort of stimulus? And then also doing a lot of sort of emotion surfing as well. So how do you respond when these emotions come up? How do you calm yourself down? At what point in your emotional sort of ups and downs do you make decisions, and do you delay decision making? And also some group work that fits in there as well. So it's I wouldn't say it's complex, Andrew, so much as it's intense.
Just intense.
Yeah. And
It's basically,
term.
it's basically retraining them how to interact with people again.
Totally.
Yeah. It's like, in terms of causation, there's a lot of theories about that. We take on the most evidence-based is a biosocial model. So basically you're born with a few traits, but also it's most importantly, your environment takes you to a place where you start kind of exhibiting those traits. So for example, like the most common ones for ASPD are like someone that's born in like an impoverished environment. They were, they were brought up in, like, for example, housing commission areas where they witnessed, criminal offending, antisocial behaviors. They mixed with the wrong groups when they were growing up. Violence and kind of theft and all that sort of stuff were normalized. And then when they grew up, it just became their life. Like this, they didn't know better. So they would just end up, doing crime, and that's just normal for them because there was no corrective feedback. So then, it's kind of like the environment had pushed them to a place where they had developed a personality disorder, and by the time they're like, in their mid-20s, it's already set in their head that violence can solve problems. If I can't get something, maybe I should steal it. That sort of stuff.
We see it definitely. You see it run through family lines as well, because you learn those initial behaviors and you learn those initial how to read and interact the world from your parents as well. So if your father or mother's got a borderline personality disorder and is really frenetic around their relationships and intense and unstable, then what you learn about relationships is that abandonment's going to be there, that you need to be, well, not need to be, but that intense emotion is part of relationships, and being impulsive is how you act. So you can see it as very much as a learnt behavior or a learnt understanding of the world as well. And Andrew's quite right. You see it in different upbringings. So borderline personality disorder, of late, a lot of the people I've seen or been working with a borderline personality disorder, they were either one of 10 kids and they didn't get much, if any, attention from mum and dad because there was just so much going on. So your importance in the world was not there, and your sense of abandonment that comes from that, and or broken families as well, whereby particularly if neither parent was particularly mature, didn't necessarily want kids, the relationship broke down, and the kids about who's living with who and who's taking responsibility for that child is a real afterthought. And that can teach, people, if you live through that, your experience of what the world and what your meaning within the world is can be quite distorted as well. And that can be where that sort of sense of abandonment or consistent abandonment can come from as well. And then you can see it again, not always, but there's generally a certain type of offending that someone with an antisocial personality disorder would commit. And where borderline, a lot of it is just incorrect responses to situations as well. Like a number of people I've done some reports on who pulled into a random breath test, no alcohol, no drugs in the system, no nothing, freaked out and drove off. And what we did when we assessed was we understood with borderline personality disorder, they was completely overwhelmed. And there was repeated behavior in there about how they handled situations with that intensity, or what they perceived to be that intensity as well. And narcissism, you see a lot of fraud as well. You know, it is my right to this money, or if they can't protect it, then I should take it.
Yeah. And domestic violence.
Yeah.
Emotional abuse, physical abuse. You see that a lot.
Yeah.
Back to your question, Melissa, about you know, the domestic violence and things. A lot of them can be like, as I mentioned before about the dimensional view of personality. A lot of the things are learned. You know, they could have, for example, it could be, you know, a lot of learned behavior about, you know, women, or how to treat people, or how to resolve disputes that could be learned from their family environment, or even just with the people that they hang out with, and just kind of kept going. So it's like having a habit.
Yes.
Yep.
Hush.
Are we okay?
Mhm.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so, you know, I'll give you an example. Like, who's scared of cockroaches? I'm terrified. And is there anyone in your family that's scared of cockroaches? Someone older, like your mom or your dad? So they were scared of cockroaches, and when you were growing up, you saw your parents freak out when they saw a cockroach. So you learned to be scared of cockroaches. So yeah, you were never given the opportunity to see that it's actually harmless. That's why when you've grown up, you're scared of cockroaches by default. You wouldn't even question it. It's the same for kind of these antisocial beliefs.
But can I just ask a question in regard to that? So in regard to environmental factors, I understand how a lot of people, environmental factors do affect personality. But what do you say about people who have parents who are drug addicts or alcoholics, or violent, and the kids grow up and they want to be the completely opposite to their parents? So you get people who live in devastating environments, and yet they become very successful simply because they were living in a devastating environment. So yeah, do you know what I mean? So sometimes it just depends on I mean, of course, there's a lot of biological factors, but I also believe that there are two types of people. One is, okay, they've been learnt and taught, and they've lived in an environment where, you know, this is the norm. But then there's another set of people who have lived in a really devastating and bad environment, and yet they just want to do the completely opposite and be successful simply because their parents were this way. So they want to be the complete opposite to what their parents were.
That's right.
Absolutely. I haven't checked the data lately, but the last I heard, which was a few years ago, I think they believe that 50% of individuals who experience a crime committed against them as a child go on to offend themselves. So it's like a real 50-50 split between what happens. And that's repeated offending against you as well. But I think you're quite right. Some people, it becomes, this debilitating way in which you view the world. And others, it goes on to be quite a pro-social driver. Generally, what I feel or what I see is that it depends what's happening outside the family unit for that individual as well. Do they see an opportunity to be different, or is the community around the family exhibiting the same behaviours that the family themselves are seeing as well? And that is where something like a school can be a really powerful avenue. Sport can be a really powerful avenue for young kids that are growing up with these challenges as well. Friendship and social circles as well can be a really powerful tool as well. But a lot of antisocial people that go on to develop an antisocial personality disorder, what we see is, like Andrew was saying, a lack of rules that or discipline guidance. You know, they're out at night, and they're out at night with other kids who also are lacking disciplinary guidance and corrective sort of
feedback
from the parents, and so they start to learn off each other as well. So it's always then that greater network starts to impact each individual and guiding whether or not this becomes a path they go down, or whether or not they see that hope and belief for something different in themselves.
Yeah, it really looks at, that it's just because someone experienced hardship or experienced, witnessed that sort of stuff doesn't mean that they'll automatically go on to becoming an antisocial person. There's still a level of cognition. There's still, thought and decision making that people kind of go through, and that leads them to take on, a particular lifestyle. I've worked with a lot of people who had similar upbringing, who end up, doing quite well. Like they've seen the crime being being committed. They've seen the domestic violence, and the thing is, they've also seen an alternative. Like they saw their friends having loving relationships, and they wanted that. That's kind of having the opportunities to see an alternative is a protective factor, we call them. And these difficult experiences are called risk factors. So it doesn't necessarily determine a bad lifestyle. It just makes it more, gives them a higher risk of taking on that path. So yeah, that's a good question though. So just because you had a bad time doesn't mean you're going to end up being a bad person. So yeah, so if you do, so a quick tip is that, if you do find that you're quickly attracted to, impressed, or starting to like your client, I'd have my alarm bells ringing. If they feel too good to be true, they probably are. Like, what I noticed is that, when we worked in jails, is that someone who was quite psychopathic, a lot of the nurses, a lot of the prison guards would be loving this guy. They give him all these privileges, and I'd just be sitting there with, or every other psychologist be sitting there going, oh, this is so scary, man. This guy is really risky. So if you find yourself, trying to have that attraction, being impressed and liking them, I would be very careful with your client and taking on a more objective approach. And we'll talk a bit more about strategies, but this is just something to be aware of. So this is about, so the reason we're going through this is to teach you a bit of awareness. Sorry, we haven't done B, haven't finished B yet. So histrionic, so someone who's constantly trying to impress others, to bolster their self-esteem. They turn all the conversations to themselves, highly attention-seeking, resentful of others when they do not admire them. So if they get rejected, they're just like, oh, it's ridiculous. And then they're relentlessly striving for approval, strong focus on physical attraction and seduction, highly emotionally expressive, exaggerated and theatrical even, and confuses sexuality with intimacy. So, they find, people tend to find themselves drawn to them by their enthusiasm, apparent openness, or flirtatiousness. So thinking back to the personality assessment you did earlier, there was a scale on openness to experiences or closeness. So their openness is all the way in the other side, like off the scale. The reason it's called a disorder is when it's off the scale of that 5-factor model that you did. So yeah, if you see clients that are constantly giving you gifts and dramatic, giving you, exhibiting ingratiating behaviors, they're like, you're the best lawyer I've ever met, and then they dress quite seductively, I'd be like, oh, you have to know that this is something that's not normal, first of all, and they probably don't like you as well. It's not you that they like, they're just trying to get you to give them attention. And so I'd have my alarm bells if if you notice that's how they behave and that's how they present themselves. Narcissistic personality disorder, you see that a lot in like domestic violence, a lot of drug, I guess, like, yeah, a lot of general offending, and even family law, we see that quite a lot. So then, these are arrogant, they believe that they're superior, have a grandiose sense of self. They have fantasies of power, success, and fame. They're quite entitled, contemptuous of others. So like, when someone speaks, they'll just be like, oh, like peasants. That's how they kind of see the world. they're indifferent to the rights and welfare of others and societal laws. So conceptually, they're quite similar to the antisocial personality disorder, except they might not have the level of offending and the conduct issues. So they might just be, a bit difficult. They're very difficult to be with, because they're very persuasive. They're intellectual, and there's this initial attraction towards them because they're just so grand. And then once they hook you in, you find yourself in an emotionally abusive relationship. So you might even hear them lie about the successes and achievements. Like, I've got this Rolls Royce just parked there. My helicopter's just about to land on this helipad. That sort of stuff. And they always believe that the other person's wrong or dumb. Very condescending as well. So if you start seeing, they're kind of like there's superficial charm as well. So I guess the biggest alarm bells are like superficial charm. If you notice that, feeling attracted to them, or that, you're quite drawn to how they're presenting, or they're quite nice, they wine and dine you, quite ingratiating, that sort of stuff. That's the main thing that you want to be aware of, is over familiarity, superficial charm, that sort of stuff for these type of behaviors, for these sort of personalities. Yeah. Okay. Finally, borderline personality disorder. First of all, it is usually overdiagnosed. Like I think in the past, in the 90s, every difficult female patient that a doctor comes across has borderline personality disorder. And now we've got so many people with borderline personality disorders. But they could just, be under a lot of stress. But it is what it is. Anyway, so a true borderline personality disorder patient is someone that exhibits frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment, a pattern of unstable and intense relationships where they alternate between, idolizing you, and then all of a sudden you're in the doghouse, and then they love you again. It's kind of the I hate you, don't leave me kind of relationship dynamic. They have identity issues, quite impulsive, so recklessness, substance use, promiscuity, sometimes even offending behavior, because it's and also self-harming or suicidal threats or behaviors. The self-harming behavior can also be recklessness, so like they'll speed a lot, or they'll do a lot of drugs and they OD, or they have unsafe sex because they're trying to hurt themselves. Quite emotionally unstable, difficult to regulate their emotions. So those are the type of clients who you would probably get your initial instructions from them, and they'd be crying and on the ground and everything, woe is me, I can't handle this. And then if you don't validate them, they'll think you're an asshole, they'll move on or something like that. So and also there's inappropriate and intense anger issues. So this is all dramatic, so this is a dramatic, emotional, and erratic cluster. So these are the people who are all over the place and in your face as well. So yeah, that's basically the 0 to 100 really quickly. They tend to have a complex trauma history, like severe abuse or neglect throughout their childhood. You see them in a pattern of unhealthy relationships, highly emotional that are difficult to control, dramatic and chaotic lifestyle. Like if they're more likely to be single, separated, or divorced. Tend to be a criminal lawyer's repeat customer as well, just like ASPD. Funnily enough, females tend to be diagnosed with borderline. Males tend to be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder because they have quite a lot of similar traits, in terms of impulsivity, anger, like emotional dysregulation issues, and interpersonal difficulties. So yeah, so that sort of stuff. So if you notice that your client is, very emotionally unstable, that's something you want to refer them to a psychologist as well, because they'd usually be quite, distraught every time, and they'd come to you with a different, every day is a fire for them. Okay, cool. Avoidant personality disorders. So cluster C, fearful and anxious, you won't see them, like, because they're too scared to turn up anyway. So the avoidant personality disorder is kind of the extreme version of social phobia, except they actually believe that it's right to be fearful of others and they don't want to change it. So they're filled with fear of rejection and self-doubt, deep feelings of inadequacy, that sort of stuff. They're few friends, hypersensitive to criticism. You won't see them. They're basically hidden somewhere. But at some point, some doctor found them and gave them this criteria. Dependent personality disorder is someone that you would probably you might have seen it before, is someone that basically cannot be alone. They basically lose their shit if they're single or alone. They're very caring, self-sacrificing to a fault, ever giving of warmth, love, and tenderness, happy when others are happy, apologetic, self-sacrificing. They see themselves as helpless and vulnerable. So you tend to see them as victims of crime, and also, basically just they're always victims. And I guess in family law matters, you might actually come across them, because they'll be kind of saying that, oh, this guy's a bastard, I did everything for them. They're very clingy. They're suffocating in their relationship. They have a strong need to be cared for, great difficulties making decisions alone. They always need someone to be around to basically help them. Yep. That's basically that. Okay, finally, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, basically what we talked about earlier, I showed you. They're quite exact with the standards, especially in relation to morality and ethics. They're quite, things have to have an order, meticulous with details, and very and detailed focus, rule driven, that sort of stuff. You won't see any of these guys, actually. Very rare to see them. But anyway, let's move on. Okay, so how do we deal with them? I'll pass it on to Oliver, who will go through some of the strategies.
Brilliant. So, as Andrew was saying, personality disorders are around sort of, a personality that alters from what other cultural norms are, and that is causing the person distress or dysfunction. And that distress or dysfunction is seen in their social, organizational, like their career, their occupational, or their also health functioning as well. So you sort of want to be looking for both those things to be combined for when they're then looking at sort of towards a personality disorder. Now, when you're trying to operate with someone or work with someone that's got a personality disorder, there are a couple of things that we need to be cautious of and prepare for when we first recognize these presentations or symptoms taking place, to help us make that relationship as effective as possible. And the important thing to recognize first is the individuals may or may not recognize what they're doing, and they're probably going to see it's either their right and or normal to be behaving in this way as well, which can make countering the behavior a little bit hard, technical, and very repetitive as well. So it's not about correcting the behavior once, but probably preparing yourself. You're going to have to not put up with this behavior, but be correcting it and putting boundaries in there consistently through your working with the individual. The first is dependence. Individuals that present with a variety of those, particularly the cluster B personality disorders, they form a dependence on you pretty quickly as well. And they may start to talk to you about other issues beyond their legal circumstances or their legal situation as well, and seek guidance from that as well. So be careful of starting to go outside your scope of area of expertise or relationship with the individual, because it won't be a one-off. You'll start to get phone calls and text messages and emails about a variety of different things which have nothing to do with the court case or with their legal situation as well. So be careful to set up those boundaries early on, and be careful in regards to how much contact information you're giving out as well. There's likely to be some unhealthy relationships happening in other areas of their life as well, either an over-dependence on certain individuals. Maybe, you might be exhibited within 2 months of meeting someone, they're engaged, just bought a house they can't afford, and telling you how much they love and are going to marry this person. We're planning on having kids by the end of the year. There could be erratic behaviours happening and relationships happening in other areas of their life, and that may impede your ability to work with them in some cases as well. They might have burnt a lot of bridges with family members or other social members, which could make them supporting their case or supporting their movement through life pretty hard. Poor organisation skills as well. So I worked with an individual that had borderline personality disorder, had lost their job, had no money, was living in their factory, and we're trying to get everything sorted as well, to get their funding sorted, to get their just some basic ID sorted, to get some Medicare and Centrelink assistance. They rolled into their, we were based on Pitt Street in the city there, just across the road from Wynyard Station. They rocked up 26 hours late to their appointment, got off at Central Station, got lost on their way walking back to Wynyard Station. And when they rocked up with their documents, it was a backpack full of about 100 different documents with everything from their grade 6 marks at school through to some relevant things in regards to tax returns as well. Poor organisation skills are probably going to be pretty prominent, particularly if the individual is lives with a borderline personality disorder. So you're going to need to be cautious of that when you're setting tasks, setting appointments, and setting expectations as well. Manipulation can be a very something to be wary of and cautious of. Extreme emotions and irrational responses to your requests as well. So how you need to be cautious of that as well, and how you're going to respond to that. Distractibility can be can be common as well. So how are you going to keep the conversation focused on the relevant points within their life? Because someone experiencing borderline, for example, is going to start telling you a range of different stories, and they're going to not really care about the 1 hour you've put aside for them. They're going to talk until they're done, which could be 2 to 3 hours. There could be chaos everywhere as well, missed appointments, forgotten appointments as well. Another big event that's occurred, that you're seeing them around some domestic violence, and then between appointment 1 and appointment 2, they've lost their job or they've been in a car accident. Chaos tends to follow them as well. So be prepared for some chaos as well. Impulsiveness as well, which may impede your ability to work consistently and methodically with the individual. They may just go on a holiday like that. They may make a poor purchase and not be able to afford to continue paying you. There can be impulsive decisions that come along with that as well, and that could get in the way of obviously working with them in a succinct manner and taking clear instructions from them as well. And a level of bluntness as well. So an inability to read emotions or care for emotions can make individuals with certain personality types quite blunt and harsh to work with. And a lot of that is going to be remembering that this is them being them, not so much how they purely or honestly feel about you and or your ability to work or your ability to support them as well. So how do you manage with an individual that you notice is exhibiting with some personality traits which are making them too difficult to work with? The first is avoiding diagnosing as well. So again, a personality is at the core of who we are. It's how we exhibit the world. To us, we view our personality as normal. No one really is going to sit there and say, I've got a clinical level of an abnormal personality. Yeah, I've got differences to my colleagues. Yeah, I'm a bit different to my friend, but I'm not abnormal. The way I view the world is not abnormal. So providing a diagnosis to someone, A, it's obviously not the profession you're in, but B, it generally doesn't go down that crash hot when someone first is delivered a diagnosis of a personality disorder. So, and there's usually a lot of defiance around that as well. So don't diagnose. This is all around you being aware and you tweaking and moving the chess pieces in your own head around how you're going to make this relationship as effective as possible and get through the work that you need to get through to build the case and get the result that is needed as well. So quite early on, consider the involvement of other services, particularly if you know there's chaos everywhere. There's instability in housing, if there's instability in emotional regulation. Start to talk and get in place with the individual what other supports might be helpful or necessary for them as well. That is going to help you stay in the legal laneway. That is going to prevent them from coming to you and developing a dependency for other areas of their life as well. And I know it's not your job, and a lot of you are probably quite good at keeping that, but if there's chaos everywhere else, it's going to make trying to work succinctly and effectively hard as well. So ask individuals about what other supports they might have. Have they ever spoken to a psychologist? You don't have to tell them why you're thinking they might have or might not have, but have they ever spoken to a psychologist before? Have they spoken to Centrelink? Have they spoken to housing? Have they spoken to any other sort of support service as well, to try and limit the chaos that's happening elsewhere as well. And look, if you think the person might need some support, but they're not exactly cognizant of how their behavior and way of seeing the world is a bit different, simply lead in with, hey, going through a legal battle or some court issues can be quite stressful and cause a lot of people some stress and distress. You know, I advise to a lot of my clients that in addition to working with me, that you maybe also seek some support from a psychologist or counselor as well, just to help give you some support along here as well, because me as a lawyer, I'm not trained to provide that to you as effectively as possible. And that can be a really good way of deflecting the individual to the professional supports they might need as well. Personal awareness as well. As we mentioned, people can be really quite abrupt. They can be manipulative. They can be emotionally very frustrating to work with. The key to working with someone that is presenting with difficult personalities is to make sure you're as centered as possible as well. Deep breaths before meetings, deep breaths during meetings, and deep breath after meetings can help you prevent yourself from becoming emotional as well. The worst thing you want is two emotional people talking about something emotional and then a whole bunch of emotional ideas and yelling starting to perpetuate as well. So practice a lot of personal awareness as well. Prepare yourself for the meetings that you're going to have with this individual. Prepare yourself to expect some rude or crude comments, some manipulation, some lack of responsibility and things like that, so that you're setting yourself up for success, but also the other person up for success as well. Because if you're expecting them to come in as a calm, cool, collected and considered person, they're not going to meet, they're not going to reach your expectations either. And given its personality, it's not going to change either. How they present in session 1, 2 is probably how they're going to be presenting at meeting 6, 7, 8 as well. So set yourself up for some success, and therefore adapt your expectations as well, particularly someone with a borderline type traits and symptoms. Small tasks, lots of information, maps or clear instructions about how to get to the train station to your office, and those sorts of things can be really beneficial. And work through it just small steps can really help to sort of keep things effective as possible. Strong professional boundaries as well, sort of really keep the conversation and keep what you're talking about on the matter as well. Obviously, you might need to talk about family histories, all those sorts of things, but try and keep it really strong on what we're talking about here, and set that expectation up early, that when we're here, we talk about this matter, we talk about your defense or whatever it might be. We don't talk about the other stuff as well. That is where you can link back into your professional supports or your family support. So set a really clear understanding expectation of what your relationship is to this individual as well, and do that early, and display those boundaries as well. Keep objectivity. So really make sure that, as Andrew was saying before, if things start to sound a bit too good to be true, if they start to sound way too much like a setup, hey, 1,000,000 to 1 shot, you wouldn't, I was just wrong place, wrong time, you wouldn't guess it. But that's been the case for about 30 years in a row. That's probably where you need to start really making sure you're again, personal awareness about your objectivity around that as well. Yes, we are there to be an ally, but we're not there to be a friend. And this can be a hard relationship for psychologists to hold as well. We're here to be an ally, but we're not here to be a friend as well. We're here to work effectively together. What does that look like, and how do I stay objective in that as well? Help them stay focused, particularly borderline. As I said, they can start shooting off shots in all sorts of different direction. Get onto it early. As soon as you start seeing someone start to talk about something irrelevant, bring them back gently, back to what we're focusing on, and some tips around that could be like, that's really interesting. Maybe we can talk about that a bit later, but right now we're focusing on whatever it was you were discussing right there and then. So acknowledge and then bring back. And assertive communication can bring you back as well in setting those boundaries as well. So setting clearly your expectations, and through all of this, practicing empathy as well. So the last thing you want to do is blow up at the individual as well. It is their personality that is leading to them to react to these situations as they are. So as silly or as insignificant as it might seem to you, it is real for that person. And they are experiencing that level of emotional response, that level of impulsivity, that level of decision-making to it. You need to respect that, understand it, make space for that, acknowledge how they're feeling. It seems like you're really caught up in this moment. It seems like this is causing you a lot of stress. Seems like you're not having access to these children is causing you a lot of pain. Whether it be, I haven't had my kids for 5 minutes, or I haven't had my kids for 5 months, it's real for them. And you need to acknowledge that for them. That can help you but that can help you become an ally to them as well. You are listening, but you're keeping that boundary whereby you're not showing sympathy either as well. And if you can put down those breadcrumbs a little bit, you can start to build that trust to whether you can start challenging the individual on certain factors as well. So number one, and that only comes with personal awareness as well. You can't be empathic if you're frustrated at a person as well. So keep the calm, acknowledge, open-ended questions, reflection. From what you're saying, it sounds like this has really caught you off guard. You're really upset that this person's saying this about you. Acknowledge and then bring it back to what we're talking about. So what's next? X, Y, Z. And if you keep doing that, you'll keep the conversation moving forward as best as possible. Now, I know that we've gone just over time. Do we have a couple more minutes to sort of wind things up?
Yes, absolutely. You're doing a fantastic job. So I don't think that anybody really wants you to end just yet. So go ahead.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Andrew, I'll answer a couple of these, and then
Yep.
maybe you can get into the others.
Yeah.
The first one here is drug and alcohol. So this can get really complicated really quickly, because someone who is dependent on drug and alcohol, or alcohol, needs drug and or alcohol to function as well. So Andrew will probably give you some more strategies in regards to how to support someone that's presenting under the effects of drug or alcohol and or recovering or consistently using, because it's not as easy as simply saying, hey, can you not rock up drunk or under the effects? Because that might not be a possible solution, particularly if there's a dependency, because you're going to get some withdrawals as well. So Andrew, did you want to jump in with some?
Yeah, that's right. So like, obviously you don't want to be taking instructions when they're clearly drunk and they can't really function. But if there is a history of, don't have a no drug policy, no alcohol policy, especially when there's chronic drug and alcohol issues, like, especially because sometimes they might need some substances in the system in order to function because of how people develop tolerance. Like, for example, how many of us drink here? Let's be real. Like we like the first time we drank alcohol, we probably got drunk really easily, right? But now that we've kind of developed some level of tolerance, we can probably down 4 or 5 glasses of wine and still talk properly. So that's tolerance. And someone that drinks and times that by 20, someone without alcohol in their system probably cannot function. They'll need a little bit to bring them back to normality in order to actually maintain a conversation with you, attend their appointments, and actually do stuff. So you would, if you notice that there is a history of drug use, or even from just interacting with them, you would kind of want to say, it's okay to be a little bit intoxicated, but are you at a place, you kind of had to make your own assessment here. Like, do you think they can actually give you give you proper instructions, actually understand what you're saying? That's something you want to be aware of. I guess moving on, someone that's psychotic, that's I guess if they're very bizarre and strange and they appear to be hearing or seeing things that aren't there, or they have an extensive medical history or drug and alcohol history, especially when you look at the medical records and it says like psychotic disorder or psychosis or something like that, I would be a bit more aware of how they're presenting, especially when their story is a bit weird as well. Like, I think this guy has been trying to poison me for the past 20 years, and they don't really have any evidence, like actual evidence for it. What you would do is just, first of all, understand that not every psychotic person is dangerous. It's usually anger and psychosis that mediates aggression, especially with some drugs as well. So know that they might not necessarily be dangerous, but I would first of all refer them to a doctor or a psychologist, psychiatrist, anyone, to make sure that it's managed and they're taking medications. And it might even be a time, not be a good time for you to actually work with them at the moment, because they're too unwell at that point.
Yeah.
And if it's a criminal law matter, I think there are certain applications you can make as well.
Yeah, and that's the same with drug and alcohol, depending on the level of dependency. And again, not every case, particularly criminal law, can you just, put thing, do you have time to sort of work with an individual to sort of overcome those challenges? But that also might be, is getting this person to a state of, where they can present not under the influence, how do we work to that before we start to really progress things much further as well, and how's that all placed into the timeline? I mean, this is also where some things like fitness to plea can come into line, Andrew, not so much drug and alcohol use, obviously, but psychotic psychosis, active unmedicated psychosis definitely obviously can impact someone's ability to make coherent and considered decisions as well. So that's where you might need to be considering some alternatives in that manner, as Andrew was saying, some different pleas as well. Suicidal ideation, if you've got a client, I mean, this can be really really hard. So suicidal ideation, particularly if you're seeing it within your office, which COVID obviously not happening now, maybe in back when everything's sort of to normal, this is where you sort of you want to be prepared for this as opposed to responding to it, I suppose, as well. So does yourself and or your firm or chambers have a plan in place on how to respond to suicidality or self-harm as well? Because it can be hard. It can be, from one end, it could be a genuine threat, and it could also go as a manipulation tactic as well, because they know that it will keep your attention and keep you focused on them as well. So it can be really hard to balance as well, and how that you would respond to someone exhibiting suicidal ideation. Fundamentally, at the bottom of it, if you are concerned that this person is legitimately going to hurt themselves, it's 000 straight away, and get the personal level of support at that point as well. Also be linking them back into if they have other support mechanisms around them as well. But, you want to be sort of the suicidal ideation that you're more concerned of than an emotional, I'm just going to go kill myself sort of thing. The suicidal ideation you're probably more concerned around is that starting to show a complete lack of care. What's the matter of the result? I'm not going to be around. People starting to give away their possessions, prized possessions as well. So if you notice that your client, comes in and says, "Oh, sorry, I'm late. I just, I caught public transport because I gave my car to my niece or nephew," that can be where you'd probably need to start steering into the question a little bit about, hey, I'm noticing that you're starting to what do you mean by you're not going to be here? Or, you know, I know that you use your car every day. Why did you give it away? It's more around steering into that question a little bit and exploring that with the person, rather than either A, avoiding it, or B, not feeling like it's an appropriate place for you to go into. Because particularly if they're presenting in that case, you're working with an individual that's considered this for a while and is not thinking drastically emotionally about things as well. So there's ways that you can talk through with that individual, linking them into professional supports, whether it be psychologist, psychiatrist, Lifeline as well. But again, at the end of the day, if you're really concerned, that O is most important as well. And bringing up that conversation early on when you first start to recognize some of those symptoms or signs, sorry.
Yeah. So child abuse and neglect, I think that's, as far as I understand, lawyers are not mandatory reporters, but it's really up to you and whether you want to notify the DCJ if you have any child concerns. Like if you have a client that you know, has children and you know, they're saying like, oh, you know, my child can't stop crying. Sometimes, you know, I just kind of slap them, or they bring their child to the meeting, and you can see that the child's kind of malnutritioned, or they just don't look that right. They look a bit funny. Then you know, I would want to be talking to the client about, you know, I'm a bit concerned about your child. Like, what's, like, you know, is he getting enough food to eat? That sort of stuff. Start being curious. I understand it's not really, it might be outside of your role, but I guess for the welfare of the child, I would actually ask a few questions about that and have that curiosity and have their interest at hand. So what else is there? Another thing that's not on there is someone with a low cognitive functioning. So if someone actually, you know, has like a traumatic brain injury or has an intellectual disability or something like that, how do you actually deal with them? First of all, usually they would have, if they've been diagnosed with something, they would have a psychological report on their IQ level, what they can and can't do, and how to manage them. I would actually have if you do have access to it, it'll be great, because it will teach you how to actually communicate with them. But rule of thumb is speak slowly, clearly, concrete examples. Don't use abstract language, and don't have too many ifs, or like kind of if this then that. It's kind of like really simple. This will happen, and then this will happen, and then kind of spoon feed the information. More dramatic kind of expression, so it's very clear what you're trying to describe or advise them. Use diagrams, flowcharts, pictures if possible. But that's like, you know, if they're really struggling to understand, you can try to be a bit creative in how you communicate with them. That's something that you know, it's considered a difficult situation because, you know, their functioning is impaired. Yeah, I'm quite aware of the time. How about I guess we'll just finish up and talk about, you know, other safety concerns, like, you know, just sit closest to the door, have the phone with you, don't be alone in the office. You know, if you're able to meet with them via teleconference, that would be the best. If you feel uncomfortable, end the meeting, that sort of stuff, I guess you already know. So that's something that just to remind you that, you know, your safety comes first. So yeah, we basically end the meeting if we don't feel safe. You know, we're not even going to treat them or assess them if we don't feel safe. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add, Ollie?
No, that's about it. I mean, the bottom three dots, or the middle three dots there, is really around, you know, as Andrew was saying, use that word curiosity. And that's what we'd be encouraging. If you start to pick up on some things around suicidal or self-harming talk, or you start to notice some things around child abuse, neglect, and family and domestic violence as well, you sort of want to be curious. You know, start with curiosity, ask those open-ended questions, make some observations as well in a non-accusational way. It's like, you know, not saying you're not thinking about killing yourself, are you? But like, are you having thoughts of suicide? So you want to ask the question from a neutral standpoint, so that it is okay to be having thoughts of suicide, not something that should be hidden as well. So always remember that point of neutrality when you're being curious around suicide or child abuse or family and domestic violence, because then you're encouraging the person to be honest. And once you have that conversation with the individual, it's then easier to then lead them to the supports that they need as well. And even if they deny it, even if they say, no, absolutely, it's all good, making an observation like that can just plant the seed that, you know, they know that you've noticed it. You noticed it enough, you care enough to highlight it. They may come back to you at a later appointment and highlight that or actually correct their statement from before as well. But again, like I said, with all that, it's all around having a proactive strategy and process in place as well, rather than waiting for the first time it presents to have something in place. But of course, we've gone through our presentation. I know we've gone over, but if there's any questions, we're more than happy to answer them for you now as well.
Any questions from anyone?
I think Raymond's got
Raymond.
Oh, look,
I had, sorry.
so go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just had one question. It's probably pretty tricky, but in a situation where you're identifying some of those issues in children, in a family law matter, you know, teens, young teens,
Yeah.
are those personality traits something that you will see in teenagers at times? For instance, the borderline personality disorder. And in those circumstances, you know, how do you sort of navigate that issue around with parents? Or should we effectively?
I guess, okay, so technically you can't have a personality disorder unless you turn 18. So if they're a teenager, they're too young to have a well-formed personality or consistent way of behaving. If they're quite unemotional, like if they're quite emotional and they're, you know, quite elevated and they can't actually regulate themselves, that's actually a sign of, you know, mental disorder, where you would want to, I guess it depends on I can't really imagine how, like what sort of involvement you would have with them other than referring them to a health professional.
Yeah. So definitely, yeah, to build on Andrew's point there, it's sort of, a full, like, diagnosable level of personality issues is coming in at 18 once you've had that time to form it. But there's certainly some other things like defiant disorder.
Oppositional defiant disorder. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like a child that is just really poorly
Naughty.
behaved.
Very naughty.
And showing those initial signs of aggressiveness and, you know, hurting animals or stealing or things like that. So there's definitely signs that might be there. I suppose it's really up to you on a I was going to say case by case, sort of, yeah. It is case by case, right? But not case by case, like situation by situation. That's what I'm trying to say. Manner, and depending on what's probably brought the family there to meet with you, and is the child's behavior that's been the offending, or is it a parent's? I mean, it depends on how you feel your relationship with the client family is, and then how you bring that up with them. If you feel it's appropriate or okay, you know, there might be mentioning some things to the family about, you know, you just say, look, I've been doing this for a while, and, you know, individuals at the age of your son or daughter here that have had these sorts of offences before have really benefited from having an assessment from a psychologist and understanding if there's ways that they can be supported in that manner, not just, you know, from a criminal or legal perspective as well. So you can really sort of phrase that question in that, you know, how can we build a good future? How can we set them on a good course? If you enter it into that way through that, you know, your observations within the profession and what you've seen has worked previously, and then leaving it with them. I think the important thing for yourselves and us as psychologists, remember, is that we can help people. We can't rescue. So if you're putting a sort of an option out there, that's helping. It's up to the other, you know, the family and the parents to take that up as an option. But you can't rescue people if they don't see it that way or don't see a benefit in it. Then you've done absolutely your part and should feel good about that. You've got to leave it with them from that point.
Yeah, typically, if a kid's very naughty, it's an indicator that there are family issues. Like the family is chaotic, or they're not they're disorganized, and they can't really like actually meet the child's needs, or even like provide them with the correct boundaries to behave. So yeah, typically if kids are diagnosed with like ODD, like oppositional defiant disorder, what that means to me is poor parenting. So I would usually work with the parent. So I guess if that helps with, you know, how you would get involved, is that, you know, that indicates that there are issues in the family to kind of cause a child to be behaving that way.
Yeah.
I hope we answered your question. Cool.
Raymond?
Yeah, look, you mentioned earlier assertive communication skills. You may find yourself in a situation, and very often in a situation, where a client, you have limited time, that you need to provide him or her with certain information and identify information that he or she needs to provide before the next appointment. Is there some sort of model or approach, not to outline today, but any reading or particular model that you could refer us to follow up, some way of maintaining clarity without being overbearing or patronizing?
One thing I'd say is, when you know, this is a really important appointment or meeting, and we need to meet some pretty clear objectives, and make the most of this time, I would use the assertive appointment up front and prepare them for it as well. So I'd say, all right, for this appointment, look, I'm just wary that we really need to get through some things today. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and it's really important that we stay on track. And I might be a little bit short or sharp or efficient with the way that we talk today, but it's again to make sure that we're getting through what we need to get through today. And if you set that up front, you then set a scene and expectation for that meeting moving forward. It's going to give you the best opportunity then, when you do correct them back onto subject, it not coming out of the blue, or them feeling like you don't care, because you can say, hey, just a reminder, look, I know what you're going down. I know what you're saying here. I know it's you know that it's really impacting you. But to help you best, we need to stay focused on these questions or topics or whatever we're getting through today.
Yeah, I'd even say, look, forgive me if I do cut you off. It's not that I don't want to hear your story. I just have a mission to do today. And that they're usually, like, I would preempt them if I know that they can be quite, they can take things very personally, or that they're very easily upset, and then I'll just cut them off and they go, oh yeah, you know, and then if you see them getting upset, you go, you know, but you know what I told you before, you actually gently remind them, like, I'm so sorry, like, and you just kind of be really, really respectful in that sense. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Are there any readings or models that you would be able to recommend?
I would do some work, research. I don't have exact readings for yourself, but if you research micro counselling skills, particularly anything that's prepared by Lifeline on micro counselling skills. I don't know if Lifeline published them, but it's part of the Lifeline training. It's really good at helping you draw information out of people, have considered conversations, and create empathy and understanding with people as well. So that can be a really good starter. And the micro counseling skills actually probably help you ask really good questions of your clients as well, and how to draw questions and responses out from people. So particularly the difference between opened and closed questions as well. So open-ended questions are obviously ones that provoke a worded, multi-worded response. Closed questions are yes, no. So if you're finding it really hard to draw something out of someone, start asking a lot more open-ended questions. Who, what, where, when, how, and wow. You can ask, not wow, who, what, where, when, how, and why. you can draw out, and you can ask any question framed under those 6 ways if you prepare yourself enough. You can then do the opposite. If you know this person is going to give you 10 times as much information as you need, make sure you're asking all your questions as close-ended questions. Yes, no, and even frame it with them. So, okay, Daryl, I'm working with you today. We need to be really quick and efficient today to get through all we've got to get to. I'm going to ask you yes or no questions. And it's really important that all you give me is yes or no. Yep. Or if you're unsure, say unsure.
I just want to make a suggestion to all the lawyers out there. If you want to learn some listening and probing skills, it's quite useful doing the mediation course, even if you don't become a mediator, because it actually teaches you how to effectively communicate. So instead of saying why, you say how, you know, it's just reframing conversations to, I mean, it's not clinically assessing people for their mental illness. And I can just also just add to that, that it's not very easy, even if you're a psychologist, to pick up on what is diagnostically wrong with someone, because I'm sure everybody who works in the area of family law or crime knows that you can get about 5 diagnoses from 5 different psychologists. So it's just more a question of picking up that there's something wrong and protecting yourself, but more importantly, in terms of communication, that's the useful thing, because you can also add it to your CLE points. That's, you know.
Absolutely.
Sorry, can I just say, and I also think it's important that I mean, I understand that we need to get to the point and we need the questions answered, but it's for me, it's extremely important that I show empathy. I'm one of those empathetic lawyers. So I think that for me, you've got to understand their situation as well, because say I don't do family law, but I'm just giving you an example. You know, people are going through traumatic experiences, and I think empathy is key when it comes to, you know, gaining that trust from your client. So there's a balancing act, I think, as well, in the sense of, yeah, we need those answers, we need to get them, but there's a way to do it. And I think we're kind of like got to navigate through that way, because you need to still have that empathy. You still need to gain that trust from the client. And when you're saying we need to get these questions, the client's going to sit back and say, but I want to pour out my emotion. I get that we're not a psychologist, but sometimes we've got to give that extra time in order for us to, for them to gain our trust, because empathy for me is extremely important when it comes to situations like that. So there is a balancing act. I think we've got to work it out.
And the more time, so there's a rule within psychology, it's around, you know, the difference between being with and doing with. And as a psychologist, you know, our model is you should be spending 80% of time being with, and then 20% of time doing with as well. So if you find yourself as a psych counselor, whatever, someone in a talking profession, if you're speaking more than 20% of the time, you're doing too much. And the more empathy and rapport you can build with someone, the more likely they're then going to be to listen to your suggestions and strategies beyond that as well. But if you move someone too quickly into action or push them towards action, you're exactly right. They might feel unheard. They might feel like their experience has been invalidated as well. And they what right do you have to tell me what to do, or to give me suggestions as well, even though they've sought you out to help them in their situation as well. So the more time, particularly at the beginning, you can get to know the individual, display empathy, build that rapport, get to know them, then it's going to afford you the ability that if you do need to have an appointment down the track, which needs to be efficient or more poignant, you can do that. As well, the asterisk next to all of that is then if someone's working with, or you're working with an individual with a personality disorder, your understanding of the rapport and relationship that you have, you've always got to view it that it's on like a swinging bridge or a rope bridge across a chasm, because it can all sort of shift on you very quickly as well. And that's, you know, working with people with personality disorders, there's sometimes sessions you can just tell when they walk through the door and you're like, we're not getting anything done today. We're just going to have a conversation and I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to listen to everything that's happened. I'm going to, and I'm in the back of my mind, I'm like empathy, reduce the emotion to a state where they can then, get on hopefully with the rest of the week without too much chaos happening. And we'll try again next week. I've got the luxury of that because I'm not preparing them for court that's on a specific date. But I don't know about you, Andrew, but definitely there's been times where I'm like, today's just a listening day, pretty much. Keeping it focused and on boundaries and reflecting some things, reflecting the little wins that might have occurred. But sometimes it's,
Yeah. Definitely. So we say, like, you spend more time with them in the beginning will save you a lot more time later on, because you'll get that trust and the rapport with the client, and then you can actually suggest something different in your legal advice that they're more likely to take on, as opposed to just completely balking at everything that you say.
I have one further question. Do you have any strategies for dealing with clients who just seem to love to fight and are litigious?
physically fight or verbally fight?
Or like get into like litigation, like to sue people?
Correct, yeah. So just want to keep the dispute going. Seem to love dispute, and they find dispute in every area of their life, and they're making choices that are really against their own interests, seemingly because they just like being in the thick of it.
That's, high conflict people. I guess I guess for lawyers, that's great. Isn't that great for business? But I guess what I would, as a psychologist, I would actually even name it and be like, I notice you do this quite a lot. Do you notice yourself doing this? Like, are you aware of it? And see if they're actually aware of it. And because that, sometimes most people don't know that they're doing something, to be honest with you. And if they are, then I'd be like, what would you like, knowing that, like, what are you trying to achieve? I would be asking them these questions to actually get more understanding of what's driving that behavior to be so argumentative and to be litigious. Like, what outcome are you trying to get? And usually you'll get more information. It could be like, I just want that bastard to hear me, I want him to pay for whatever that he's done to me, all that sort of stuff. So, you want validation is what you want. And then, are you going to get that from him? Like, is this, you've been doing this for the past 6 months. How's that going for you? And then, they'll be like, oh, I don't know. So then, I would kind of push, slowly nudge them away from it by kind of asking these open-ended questions. And that's kind of how I would manage them. What about you, Ollie?
Yeah, I think what we're starting to delve into now is the world of the ego. So everyone's got an ego, because if you didn't have an ego, you wouldn't be confident enough to get up off the chair you're sitting on without falling off. So we've all got a level of ego. What happens is our egos hate when we have to admit we're wrong. We hate when we have to, acknowledge that someone else did something better. We hate when our initial thought of a situation has to shift, because it demonstrates fallibility in our thinking or our ability to perceive and operate in the world as well. So commonly what you can see with people that are sort of, in that stage, the ego's gone a little bit into overdrive as well. And sort of, again, opening up the conversation around what are we really trying to achieve here. And an important one as well, as I suppose, as Andrew was saying, was those open-ended questions to really look at what's the win going to represent as well. So if we eventually get this, or what's the end line look, because understanding that could demonstrate all the different ways of getting there as well, that aren't just straight through the conflict line as well. Can we get it from somewhere else? I think also demonstrating to people that it's okay to be wrong from time to time, demonstrate that fallibility back to clients as well, can help when it's gone from a logical fight to someone just wanting to prove they're not wrong or save face as well. It's probably making it okay, again, highlighting it's okay to be wrong from time to time, sharing stories around that as well, can help sort of break down that push across the line from this is logical to this is now become irrational and ego driven as well.
I'd also refer them to see a psychologist in a really nice way. And that, you know, I would even say, you know, it seems like it's pretty stressful for you to go through all these litigation matters. Would you like to talk to someone to help you get through them? And then in your referral to the psychologist, say, this guy just keeps suing people. Can you please help him out? And then the psychologist will know, and they'll know how to approach it with them, and they'll have that conversation in a therapeutic way. Like, you know, they'll be asking those questions in a really nice way and challenging them. And hopefully that'll lead to some sort of behavioral change. But at this point, I guess for a lawyer, there's not much more you can do besides suggesting them to stop or and referring them on, because it's something quite, there's an underlying issue that's driving it. That's what I think.
And it may not be met, or that need or want may not be met through the journey that they're currently taking. They may need to be supported through another method like counselling.
All right, well, thank you so much for all of your efforts this evening. Sorry for keeping you so late. And look, it's been really fantastic and informative, and we'll certainly welcome you back another time if you wanted to come and join us. So thank you very much once again, and thanks to everybody for attending, and hopefully we'll see you all at the next one.
Thanks for having me.